Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of the Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. I'm Jodi Carlton, your host, and I'm a neurodiverse relationship expert. But like so many of you, I've been on my own journey of discovering and understanding neurodiversity, both in my personal life with my family members and even myself, and professionally as a therapist and now relationship coach to people around the world. I'm often asked, can neurodiverse partner relationships actually work? And the answer is absolutely they can. Just like any relationship, there are core variables that influence whether or not you'll thrive as a couple. Neurodiverse relationships are no different, but they have the added layer of being neurodiverse, where one or both partners is neurodivergent. So this season, I've got a lineup of couples and partners who are in neurodiverse relationships that are working. They get real personal with me about the challenges they have faced and how they've overcome those challenges in their relationships. Let's get started. All right, today I have Sadie and Steve here with me, and I'm very excited to talk to the two of you. I would introduce you, but I think you can introduce yourselves a lot better. So I don't care who starts. Tell us a little bit about yourself so that the listeners can know who we're talking to.
My name is Sadie Dingfelder, and I wrote a book called Do I Know You? A Face-Blind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. That was one of NPR's favorite books of 2024. So I was working at the Washington Post a few years ago when I sort of found out that I'm face blind, and I've always been face blind. And it sort of triggered a crisis. And this book is my nerdy midlife crisis, but it's funny. Dave Barry says I'm funny. That's the book.
Sadie, so you're a reporter, and I know what you mean by face blind, but some people might not. So can you explain that?
Yes. It's sort of like color blindness. And when face blind people look at faces, they're just as crisp as they are to anyone. But what our problem is that we don't have a good memory for faces. And so the second we're not looking at you, we forget what you look like. And a good way to experience temporary face blindness is to look at a celebrity picture upside down. You see the face as a collection of individual parts instead of a gestalt, like a whole. And that gives you a really good sense of what it's like to be face blind, because we just don't hold the information and process it in the right way for our brains to remember it.
So it's like a storage error. And the reason why I really know what that means is not just because I've been working with neurodiversity for years, but I'm face blind too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have the hardest time, for example, in restaurants, remembering who our server is because I look straight at them when I'm ordering, but then I can't for anything tell you what they look like.
Can't even get general height, gender either.
I might be able to get gender, not always, but it's really a struggle for me sometimes as a clinician because I meet with people for 2 hours sometimes. And then when their next appointment comes up, I struggle to recall until I've met with them several times. It's hard for me to remember. And then, of course, as people can imagine, just when you meet new people in new settings, I think you mentioned to me in one of your emails how you had interviewed someone from the Kennedy Center.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, are you enjoying the show? To the president of the Kennedy Center, who I just interviewed. And she, what's she supposed to say? Her friends laughed. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. So it's like a casual thing you might say to a stranger, but without the recognition of, I know you and I just talked to you. Yes. And so that is a form of neurodivergence. I mean, it's the brain is wired differently and it's working differently.
It's all about social comparison and figuring out if your experience is inside or outside of the norm, and our subjective inner experience is very hard to communicate. So we have to assume that everyone else's is the same as our own.
Because it's the only frame of reference that we have. Okay, Steve, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, my name is Steve. I am Sadie's husband. We've been together quite a while, maybe close to 10 years. I've known that Sadie was a unique personality for a long time, but it really came as a shock to me that she had face blindness and a whole bunch of other neurological kind of conditions or uniqueness. And, I guess, it's been interesting to watch her go through her journey of discovery. And, it's been a journey for myself as well to kind of learn more about her. Partly because of what she's learned, I've started to learn more about my own ADHD, which I've had since I was a kid, and didn't really take it very seriously. That was at the time when I think they just kind of gave you a pill and that was it. And things have changed a lot since 1992 or whatever. It's been really interesting to rediscover stuff about myself as well in parallel to Sadie writing her book and learning about her and how we relate to each other.
So Sadie, what prompted you to start looking or investigating this more?
Yeah, I thought that I was 100% neurotypical. And now I realize that my brain is really different from other people. And it was the crazy sort of flip in your knowledge about yourself that you have, like, that I feel like I had to do in a really short amount of time. What happened, though, is that I was grocery shopping with this guy and I lost track of him. And when I found him, he was putting a bunch of junk food in our cart, and including, I pulled out a jar of generic peanut butter and I was like, since when do you buy store brand? And Steve looked horrified. And then when I looked more closely, I realized it was not Steve. He was some random dude. And so I like dropped the peanut butter. And later, like on the cart home, I was like, this is not the kind of mistake normal people make. And, I had heard about face blindness before. Interestingly, and it's only 2% of the general population, but among people with autism, it's something like 40 to 50%. And ADHD, it's about 10%, 10 to 20%. So yeah, it's not just like, it's kind of a niche topic for the whole world, but it's actually quite relevant to most people or many people who are neurodivergent.
And I would say those are the statistics that of people that we've identified, even with how many people are neurodivergent, autistic, have face blindness, those types of things. I say we start with those statistics and assume there's more, because there are so many people like you who didn't even realize.
I'm curious because I get this question all the time and I have my answers, but I want to hear what yours is. Then, like, isn't everyone neurodivergent then?
My answer to that is no. I don't think so. I don't think everybody's neurodivergent. Well, here's the way I describe it. If you think of the bell curve, and at the top of the curve are the most commonly occurring traits and characteristics, and you can apply anything to this, like height, weight, just personality traits. You take any of those personality tests and it'll tell you, 2% of the population has this personality trait or this grouping. And when you look at neurological traits and characteristics, things like executive functioning, the way short-term memory works, emotional regulation, sensory processing, all of that, we've got the most commonly occurring traits. And people who mostly fit into the top of that bell curve, those are neurotypical individuals. But when you've got people who have outliers, maybe even one outlier could be like someone who has a really high IQ. That's neurodivergent. But then we look at all the different kinds of IQ. There's emotional IQ and musical IQ and intellectual IQ. And so that's a neurodivergence. That person is neurodivergent. And we did start understanding this with gifted individuals in the last, I'd say again, 10, 15 years. We started realizing these children, these adults are exceptional. We started calling them exceptional needs, not special needs. But on the other side of the bell curve, we also have challenges and limitations. Like you have face blindness, I have face blindness. The sensory processing thresholds are either super high or super low. And if you have a lot of super high or super low thresholds, that's going to make you neurodivergent. So I don't believe that everybody is neurodivergent because some people don't have those divergent traits. They're at that top of the bell curve and that makes them neurotypical.
Yeah, this is all new to me as well. As a person, my brothers are autistic in various different ways. And we think about all these tests that measure people. And there's this, this idea of like having a sort of superpower is kind of popular right now. And, it kind of goes against the disease model, like you were saying. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between there. We evolved to survive in a part of human society as we learn more, just personally, our relationship even, is how to kind of just have a deeper understanding of it and, find advantages, find ways to leverage it, or find ways to just understand it better, which of itself kind of helps you survive and helps you be happier and all these other things.
Yeah, not only in your own just life as an individual, but also in our relationships with others, in our marriages, but also our friendships and our family relationships, our coworker relationships, all of that. So let's talk about the two of you then. What's that been like, and what kind of difficulties did you have as a couple before you really started getting more insight about all this?
Just a few years ago, like 2019, before the pandemic, I thought that I was neurotypical. I thought Steve was. And then in the last, however many years that we've been living together 24/7, because the first half of our marriage, we never saw each other, like a married life. Steve went to South Korea for a month, and I was running around as the reporter all the time, and I was really busy. Steve was really busy. if we saw each other on weekends, like that was like great, you know? People would ask me how my marriage is going. I'm like, I haven't seen Steve in a month.
Sounds like we didn't know each other well. We knew each other pretty well, but yeah, there was definitely a period of time right before COVID where for work, I was traveling internationally a lot.
Yeah. And then in the last few years, like I've been converted to thinking we're both definitely not neurotypical. I think in general, our labels are garbage, but Steve probably qualifies as ADHD. In fact, I think you did formally with like someone at some point, right?
Yeah, I love the diagnosis.
Where'd you get it from? Like as an adult?
No, as a child. It wasn't a part of my identity. You know, I took some pills for like 6 months and when I was
Why did you stop?
13, and I stopped because I didn't like them. It wasn't something that I thought affected my life deeply. I was like, well, I guess I'm bad at certain things and I should try harder. You know, I really kind of moved on with my life.
So you got thrown together during COVID. Now you're spending so much time together. What happened? What was good about that? What was not so good about that? What happened?
You know, all this working from home suddenly happened and we had a 1-bedroom apartment. So one thing that happened is Sadie, who was mostly a writer, would go outside on the balcony and spend all of her time out there because I was loud on the phone. So we segregated, you know, that way, which was really sort of funny. You know, she would spend hours and hours out there looking at birds and writing and doing other things. For me, like the COVID stuff, we did spend more time together, and I don't know if it strained our relationship that much at all, but what it did is kind of highlight what happens when you aren't able to be with other people. Like, how much of an introvert are you? How much of an extrovert are you really? Sadie really needed to be around people. I needed to be around people a lot less. But even I was like, oh God. So working through that was interesting. But it wasn't until she was well through her book, at least for me, I started kind of picking apart my own ADHD for various reasons going on in my life. But it was one of those things that once I understood, hey, there's like a big difference in our subjective realities, it just causes you to think about it differently. So it's little things that I think I've noticed and tried to be better at understanding. And it's similarly for myself, like finding ways to be more patient with myself about things that I do and learning about the condition of ADHD and more about how it works, putting itself in an environment that helps me.
Yeah, the introverts of the world definitely struggled less with COVID. The extroverts struggled so much.
Yeah. So beginning of COVID time, like I started out thinking Steve, I didn't realize he or I were neurodivergent. And now I realize we both are. Mm-hmm. And in some ways that work together and in some ways that really conflict. And I think it sort of stems from a sense of humility when you realize that like you're actually not like one brain. You have a bunch of different brains and other sorts of modules that are glommed together. So
I love what you just said about humility. And it kind of goes back to what you said, Steve, as well, about recognizing that we have different subjective realities. And that is called cognitive empathy. Some people call it theory of mind, where we realize that my mind, my brain is really different than yours. And we're having a very different experience, even though we're in the exact same room, the exact same conversation, the exact same environment, we're experiencing it really differently. I can see you both want to respond to that.
Yeah, like, you know, when I studied that, like, 'cause I did a philosophy minor at college, and you learn about theory of mind, and it was, you know, it was largely like, oh, you know, you're sort of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and it's a little bit different than that, right? It's like deeper than that. This idea that the way we see the world, the way we interpret the world around us is just fundamentally different. That you could be having the same external stimuli and have a very different inner mind. That's what's kind of a really key insight of, I think, a lot of us, that really gives us an opportunity to understand each other better.
And it's really kind of the understanding that we can't put ourselves in other people's shoes because our brains don't work that way. Up to a certain extent, we might imagine what someone may be feeling or experiencing if they go through a certain situation. But really, I think when a lot of people refer to empathy, they're talking more about sympathy, which is really, it's really more, I sympathize with you and I feel bad for you. But cognitive empathy and even emotional empathy is really the recognition that your experience is what it is. And I may not be able to relate to what you're experiencing at all, but I believe you that you are having that experience. And that's where the humility comes in.
One of my good friends, Miriam, her brain is basically opposite mine. She's constantly visualizing things and she's got a very busy brain. She's ADHD. And like her conscious experience is just wild. I mean, she's like in a room from her past. She's like thinking about what she's going to do later. She's like thinking about what some girl said yesterday. Like, and then she's thinking about the fact she's thinking about those things. And I'm like, that sounds like total chaos. And I now understand why you're always late. Like, I wouldn't be able to get out the door on time if I had that much going on.
Everything you just described is exactly how my brain works. And I had no idea that everybody else's wasn't working like that until I even learned more about it through my work and interviewing people. And it's like, oh, and I think we don't realize or don't believe that other people are accurately reporting their inner experience, because we hear what they're saying and we're like, no, that's not true. And honestly, the field of psychology is to blame for a lot of this. There's been a lot of gaslighting, unintentional gaslighting in the psychology field that really ignores and dismisses what people are actually experiencing. And I know this really happens with neurodivergence, because people go to therapists and counselors who don't recognize or understand neurodiversity and then completely deny and don't acknowledge that what someone's reporting is their actual reality. And it can be a disaster, honestly, for couples. What words of wisdom do both of you have to share for other couples on how to make this work as a neurodiverse couple?
I don't know. I think we're still working through some of it because we're so new to this idea. Right now, I think I'm in the stage of just kind of being a little more careful about examining each other's behavior and what we can do to be a more understanding or help. Yeah, and just it's kind of like you have this deeper knowledge and you can use it to better each other's environment. So if I'm bad at like leaving stuff around, like Sadie really hates visual clutter and at a very deep level, and I leave everything everywhere, which has resulted in things being stuffed into drawers, and I can't find anything in the order more. Maybe I'll buy it again, thinking that it's gone. We have a lot of stuff. So like that's the kind of thing with a deeper understanding, you can be like, what do we do to like change this? Because now we understand what's going on, we could actually do something about it versus just kind of like noise each other or that kind of stuff.
It makes it less antagonistic. So Sadie, just jump right on back in and what are your thoughts? What do you have to share?
Okay, what I was thinking was one thing that's really fun and magical about being with one person for a very long time is that they start to know you in ways that to a level, they can really predict what you're going to do next. And being truly known and like loved is the best, right? If someone loves you and they don't really know you, then that means nothing. Being loved for all these layers of weirdness you got that most people have no idea about is like really special.
A lot of people struggle with the not feeling known. And that actually creates a lot of conflict for a lot of couples. And you were just talking about how the more you start to understand this and understand who you each are, it changes your perspective and it starts to reduce that conflict.
A lot of things we say, I think Sandy said it first, but it's like, hey, we're on the same team. It's an important kind of mantra to keep in mind, is, hey, if you're married to somebody, you're always on the same team. Nobody gets up in the morning and decides they're going to be a bad person or do something wrong. And I think it's important to kind of just keep that in mind as you like relate to someone, especially your life partner and the person you're with. Because at the end of the day, you want to resolve whatever is going on. You don't necessarily have to resolve every little thing, but just kind of going through that process of trying to understand the other person and empathizing with them instead of storing up some kind of resentment. That's almost like general relationship advice, I think. But for people who are in relationships with other neurodivergent folks, especially if they're not neurodivergent in the same ways, but it's also a gift because you know that you had your own things as well. If you both have these things that are unusual about each other or about yourselves, then you can use that as a mutual way of understanding each other. It's like a give and take.
The thing that I think we're realizing now is like that most things in the world cannot be bopped into two categories.
But let me ask you guys this. What would it be like? And you may not even be able to imagine it. But what I'm hearing from both of you is this ingredient in your relationship of cooperation and this idea of teamwork, partnership, collaboration. It's we're in this together. What would it be like for either one of you if the other partner was not as collaborative? And have you been in relationships like that in the past where you feel like you're really making a lot of effort in this, but your partner's just kind of over here living their life?
Well, until you got to the end of that, I was about to say that was the relationship Steve was in before the pandemic. Because I am bad at working in teams. I only have two modes: take over everything and do everything myself and do it so I like it, or be completely unengaged and basically not super helpful. Those are my only ways of interacting. And so whenever we have to do something together, my instinct is to be like, okay, let's divide it into tasks. Now I'm doing my list. My list will be done in 5 minutes. And oh no, my list will get done immediately. Steve's list might never get done, but the one object he's interested in will get done really well. Really well.
That is something that I think you've known about yourself, and we're kind of experimenting in ways to change a little, modulate a little. But I don't think like I've ever felt like you were on a different team. We were all going for the same goal. I guess my only past experience with this is I was in a previous relationship where I think the person was more or less just kind of debilitated by possibly depression, and I didn't really understand what was going on, and neither did they, and that didn't work out very well. And we certainly weren't on the same team, but it was like kind of by accident. And so I guess if you're in a relationship where you really feel like someone is working against you, then that is no good. And you got to figure out like if that's true or not. And if it is, maybe get up in there.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, a lot of couples are. I call it the boxing ring. They've stepped into the boxing ring and they're in such antagonistic places where they each see the other as an opponent and as someone who's blocking them from having fulfillment in life, fulfillment in their relationship. And oftentimes it's not that either one of them is a toxic or personality disorder type of individual, but they haven't had the tools to be curious about each other, to be vulnerable. Sometimes this is stuff we've brought in from childhood or previous relationships, insecurities.
How many people would you say do have those tools coming out of the gate?
Nobody.
It's like no one. Yeah.
No one. And maybe you come from a family that was pretty healthy, but and so many people like yourselves, you literally started to really understand this in the last 5 years. Steve, you knew you were ADHD, but you just didn't really even give it much attention. You didn't really understand what that meant for you until recently.
Just like you said, Steve was killing it in a career and in a world that was not built for a brain like his. Steve's a nerd. He's an engineer nerd, but he's like really creative too and thinks very divergently. And that's not typical. But Steve could still kill it because he was that smart. So he's in the wrong world kind of, but he's like killing it because he's that smart. And it was only when like the cognitive load increased to the point where Steve was at a crisis and he can no longer just power through something with brilliance.
I mean, I think there was a lot going on during COVID, but there's certainly truth to that narrative. And in my experience of getting that diagnosis so long ago, and I'm sure things have changed a lot, it was just like it was a list and it was a pill. What do you do with that? And you take the pill and you're like, well, this makes me feel like X, Y, Z. Okay. Do I like that or not? Or does it help or not? And, at least for the condition of ADHD, and I don't know how much this relates to other things, but increased understanding of the default mode network, and how it works, how your brain kind of switches between that and completing tasks, and how that gets you into like ruminative states at times or other ways, like kind of understanding that and saying, okay, what am I doing right now? Am I in this mode? Am I in that mode? How can I take myself out of that? Then if I need to take the pill for ADHD, I can use it as a very specific tool along with kind of behavioral stuff versus, I don't know, the other possibility is just ignore your own mind.
That ignoring your own mind thing, I don't think many people are real good at that. We can tell ourselves to do that, but that's a struggle. And what you just described actually in describing yourself really resonates with me, with my son who's going into electrical engineering. And we realized he was ADHD a couple of years ago, and we didn't put him on meds right away. And we did recently in his freshman year in college try some meds, and we're learning more and more too about how these medications work and how the ADHD brain has fewer dopamine receptors, and just we're understanding more what's happening in the brain and how the medication actually works for the brain, the ADHD brain. And a lot of people who are autistic have ADHD brains as well. And so what you mentioned about the pill being a tool, that's very much how he has used medication. He doesn't take it every day. He's not on the kind of med that you need to take every day to keep it at a certain level. but he won't take it every day. But he'll wake up in the mornings and think, okay, what do I need to accomplish today? Like you said, what's happening for me today? And he definitely sees the benefit of it when he needs to really like study for calculus or take an exam, and he takes it and it really helps him lock in. But he doesn't want that every day of his life because he's like, it feels kind of like I'm not exactly me when I take the pill.
He's very perceptive. I think he's totally right. You know, the number one complaint for parents for Ritalin, according to this one guy that I was talking to, Stuart Brown, is that they're not as playful on Ritalin. And so basically, a theory I have
Probably not.
ADHD is in hunter-gatherer times, we didn't have to be that focused. You could focus on what was at hand, and you didn't have to plan ahead and do things in steps and use your force of will to like just do that. We didn't have to be that task. Anyway, we didn't need the executive control as hunter-gatherers. So the ADHD people probably fit in great. We've been taking away people's leisure time, their playtime, and we've been creating more work time. And that happens actually as early as agriculture, because there are no words for work in hunter-gatherer languages until agriculture. And that's when you start getting words for work, meaning toil. There was words for like picking berries, taking care of kids, but like there was no word for toil. Those words came into existence all around the world at the same time that agriculture was developed.
That's really interesting, Sadie, how we can look at linguistics and language and how it has evolved and in terms of what we were discovering and starting to change how we lived as a society, and how the different brain types that we have, how that's influenced what we believe or how we think about those types of behaviors and brain types. And I can say what you just said about the playfulness, that is exactly what my son has said. He's extremely witty and very creative like you, Steve. Like he's got that engineering brain and he's been able to do math in his head since he was like 5, composes music and writes. He's like writing a novel, but the medication kind of puts a damper on that. It kind of turns the volume down on some of that creativity. So he definitely doesn't want to be on that med every day because he doesn't feel like himself, but he does see how it helps him when he needs it.
Being in a task positive network mode doesn't have to be toil, but even when it's not toil, like not having control over going in and out of that and like sort of more default mode where you're just thinking freely about stuff can be hard, and like it can affect how you get through the work. It's just goes to the importance of, I think, of understanding things a little bit better and using those behavioral approaches, because you're right, you don't want to load yourself up with, you know what, frankly, these medications, especially for ADHD, the medications are basically stimulants, right?
Yeah.
And they have all sorts of negative effects if you take too much, and you don't want to be on stimulants all your life, you know, or all the time. And yeah, that's one thing I actually found out going back on, because I'm also on an ADHD medication, is I find it very effective to take like the lowest on-time relief dose. Whereas before, you know, when I was a kid, it was like, oh, well, let's step it up, let's step it up, let's step it up. And, you know, on a time release, you're doing it all the time. And it just doesn't work, or it turns you into a different person.
Yeah. And everybody's brain and everybody's body is different too. So it's really finding that balance of what benefits me without harming me. And it's important to find, you know, when it comes to medications like this, to find a psychiatrist who really understands neurodiversity versus going to like a GP who just throws you at, you know, some stimulant that they know about and then doesn't know how to monitor it effectively.
Finding a therapist or, you know, some sort of practitioner that is going away from the disease model too, I think is helpful. I think a lot of therapists still, if you just go grab one out of the hat, you know, or in the disease model. So what's worked for me is like, yeah, I got my psychiatrist and I can go to him and be like, hey, give me some pills. But like, I'm really working with a therapist. Like I'm working with either a therapist or a coach. Although you got to be careful about coaches, but someone that is not using the disease model to kind of help you through some of these things behaviorally. Because I don't know if there's any psychiatrist that will actually sit down and talk to you for more than like 4 minutes.
They exist, but they're rare. And oftentimes it's the psychiatric nurse practitioners that work with the psychiatrists. We found that that's been really beneficial to us. But yeah, just agree with so much of what you said. And having been trained and licensed for 19 years, I don't work under my license anymore because it's just kind of irrelevant now, because even the licensure is more disease model. oriented.
I'm not surprised to hear that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, if you got to submit to insurance, you got to know that stuff anyway, right?
Well, insurance, that's a whole other conversation that is problematic.
But it ties in, right? Because you have like
It absolutely does, because
how the DSM is outdated and
and the insurance companies are dictating what you can and can't do with clients. So many people in this field of neurodiversity, the colleagues that I know and trust, are moving away from the disease model, moving away from even licensure. And like you said, though, it's scary because there's a lot of coaches popping up that are jumping on neurodiversity bandwagon and they don't really know what they're doing. So I always advise people to really do your homework about someone who, when you're trying to find a provider, because there's not enough training. Even academia has not caught up at all.
Really?
No. I've got a close colleague, Barbara Grant, who just finished a marriage and family therapy master's, and she said not one word was spoken about neurodiversity, which is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be interested in these topics, because just within the last few years, the cultural lens has shifted, and all of a sudden people like us probably who have been thinking these things for a while, all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, other people.
Yeah. And we're all talking to each other now. Well, I just want to thank you both so much for being guests on the podcast, sharing about yourselves. And I know it's going to help so many people. And of course, we will put links to your book and any websites that you have in our show notes.
So fun chatting with you.
Yes, thank you both. Thank you so much for being on the show. That's a wrap for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so you won't miss any of these amazing interviews. And as always, if you're benefiting and enjoying this podcast, please give us a review. It really helps other people know that this podcast is really beneficial and worth listening to. Thanks for watching on YouTube or tuning in to your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to visit me online at jodicarlton.com for more resources. I have assessment quizzes, educational articles, courses, and more. And if you have any questions, just reach out to my team at gethelp@jodicarlton.com. Until next time.